Some of you may know that I recently purchased a box of 31 graphics cards off of eBay for $90. Among the pile of low-end deprecated hardware, I found this in HD 5750. The 5000 series first released in September of 2009, with this installment debuting a month later in October. That makes this card about 13 years old, so it can definitely do with a thorough cleaning. The model we'll be looking at today was released by XFX in mid-2010, a little under a year after ATI's release. It was intended for the mid-range market and came with a price tag of $130, but can now be found on eBay for about $20 to $30. At the time of its release, this card competed with the previous generation's 4000 series as well as the GTX 200 series from Nvidia. Although it didn't offer the best performance on the market, it still had its place. What gave it a foothold against the competition was its competitive pricing, its support for DirectX 11, and the fact that it was less likely than Nvidia's upcoming Fermi cards to burn your house down. The primary feature of this XFX model was its compact single-slot design. At first, I thought that a card limited to a single slot would run hotter and perform worse than its dual-slot counterparts due to it likely running a smaller cooler. But no, apparently it was better in just about every way. Because it was physically smaller than other models, it left more room in the case for other cards, and therefore got better airflow and lower overall temperatures. But in terms of actual hardware specifications, it was identical to the reference design by ATI. Both came with the Juniper graphics processor based on the Tearscale 2 architecture and 40nm process. The 5750 came with 16 render output units, 36 texture mapping units, 720 shaders, a 700 MHz core clock, and 1 whole gigabyte of GDDR5 VRAM clocked at 1150 MHz. Interestingly enough, this card actually has driver support all the way up to Windows 10, but I still opted to run Windows 7 since it's generally less taxing on the overall system. Speaking of which, today's test bench is very suitable for this card. With an i3 4130 and 16GB of RAM, the 5750 is going to be the bottleneck in most games we test, so we'll be pushing it to its limit, and then some. The physical installation was as easy as plug and play, and driver installation went without a hitch. So, let's see how well this 13-year-old graphics card holds up in a modern gaming environment. But before we do that, consider leaving a like or subscribing because you made it this far into the video, which means there's a decent chance you actually enjoy the content. Thanks. The next game I decided to test is Rainbow Six Siege. Clicking the auto detect feature sets everything to a very interesting mixture of settings actually, with the 50% render scaling and ultra LOD quality. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that this is just not gonna work, especially considering that we're using 2.3 gigabytes out of 1 gigabyte of VRAM. I'm gonna turn everything down to as low as it can go realistically, and then we'll see how that runs before maybe cranking some settings up. I'm also going to apply an overclock of 100 MHz on the core and 250 MHz on the memory. Based on the frame rate, the game is technically playable. I mean, we're hitting 65 FPS right there, but we're getting into as low as 38, 39 with an average of 42 overall. Now, I could lower the resolution a little bit more, but I am trying to preserve at least a little bit of my sanity, because this game looks horrible. Oh, that's not good. My teammate right behind me just died. And there's a guy down there. Oh, I'm not too confident about this anymore. Yo, oh, hey, there we go, Flasher. How do I melee? What is the... Okay, what's the melee key? Oh my god, it's V or B or something around that area. You know, I don't want to jinx anything, but I feel like we might actually have a chance. I died. So, can you game Rainbow Six Siege on the 5770? I mean, technically, yeah, I did get a kill, right? The resolution and level of detail as a whole just really is not too good, and it's hard to play the game in general. I suppose it could take some getting used to and you could actually play it, but honestly, I'm just surprised that the 5770 was able to run Rainbow Six Siege as well as it did. Now, on to the next test. The next game I decided to run is Counter-Strike Global Offensive. We're currently in 1080p with the medium settings, and the game's running fairly well actually. This isn't exactly what I would call a competitive experience, but if you just want to mess around in competitive with some friends, then yeah, it'll get the job done. The overlay software currently isn't working, but we've seen frame rates anywhere as low as 35 FPS to as high as 70 FPS. So yeah, it is hovering around that 60 FPS area, but I am noticing a bit of stuttering. Alright, we're back in the game, this time with the lowest settings in 1080p, and the game is running noticeably better. I would say this is about as close to a competitive experience as you're going to get in 1080p with this graphics card. So with that, yes, you can run CSGO in 1080p on the 5770 in 2022. Now on to the next test. For some reason, I thought it would be a good idea to play Doom 2016. The game is currently in 720p with the lowest settings, and based on that we're getting 11 FPS, 9 FPS on the menu screen, this is not going to go well. Well, when I look at this wall, when I look at the floor, I get 35, 37 FPS, the GPU's at 100% utilization, so it likely still is the bottleneck. But when I turn around, a curious thing happens. Yeah, the frame rate this game is not playable by any stretch of the imagination with the 5770. I'll try turning down the resolution a bit more, but I don't think there's much we can do to make this game playable. So, we're currently in a resolution of 1152 by 648 with a render resolution of 50%. And I mean, the frame rate's a hell of a lot better. We're up to an average of 33, 34 FPS right now. Is it playable? Maybe. I mean, if you get used to it, but it would take a lot of getting used to play the game in its current state. Aside from the very obvious artifacting, I don't even know what you would call it, just the textures having an absolute nightmare. I mean, the game's relatively stable. It does drop down. Listen, man, I'm grasping for straws here. The minimum specs for this game cite a 7950, I believe, which has 2 gigabytes of VRAM. So the 1 gigabyte of, although it is DDR5 VRAM, really is not enough to run this game, and I'm guessing that's why we're having some issues with the textures. Lowering the clock speeds back to their stock values really did not impact the game in any significant way. It still runs really badly, looks really badly, and you know what? It might be playable if you're patient. If you really want to play Doom and this is the only thing you have to run it, you might be able to pull it off. Can I recommend it? No, not in a million years. Now, on to the next title. The next game I decided to test is Crysis Warhead, because I wanted to test if the HD 5770 could run Crysis. When I went to the optimal settings selection, it automatically sets it to the gamer spec, which from what I can see is roughly the high settings, and I'm curious to see how this will perform given that we are currently in 1080p. So I've been walking around for a few minutes now, and performance is not as good as I expected given that this is what the game automatically set itself to. You can see in the top left that we're currently using the full gigabyte of VRAM and that we are currently pinned at 100% utilization. I mean, it's playable, but it is 25 FPS average so far, and as you saw there, it did drop down to 21. Given that, I'm gonna turn down the settings a bit more to make it run a little bit better. And with that, I've switched down to the mainstream or medium settings for Crysis Warhead, and performance is much better, and honestly doesn't look much different. We basically doubled our frame rate in going from high to medium settings, and it's very stable with no stuttering and very minimal frame tearing. Overall, this card is performing just about as good as I expected it to. And that just about finishes up testing because the game crashed. Wow, it actually crashed so hard it caused the entire computer to reboot. Okay, on to the next game. Alright, I take it back, you can actually launch Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Wildlands on the 5770. That being said, I'm not quite sure you would want to. We're currently in a resolution of 1024 by 768 with the lowest settings allowed by the game, and we are still exceeding our VRAM usage at 1.6 gigabytes out of 1 gigabyte. I will say, it is a little bit, stable. It is consistently putting out frames, technically. It doesn't do it very often, but I mean, at least they're in one piece. There's not too much tearing, right? Another interesting thing is that the GPU utilization is at 0% and we're using 88 megabytes of VRAM. That is not correct, as the integrated graphics would definitely not be able to pull this off. Wildlands is not an easy game to run by any stretch of the imagination, and even my old 970 did struggle with it at times. Can I get a kill? You know what? I got a kill. Guys, guess what? You can play Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Wildlands. So, can you play Wildlands on this card? No, you can't. It doesn't run well. I don't know why would you think it would even be possible? Why did I think it was possible? So, in all honesty, this performed way better than I thought it would. The 5750 was in no way designed or intended for the abuse I just put it through, so the fact that it's still working is good enough for me. What I really wasn't expecting though was legitimately playable frame rates in titles such as Rainbow Six Siege. Yeah, I know that the graphics quality was horrendously low, but its ability to spit out even some frames is impressive enough. Same with Doom. The minimum graphics card requirements for that game cite a 2GB HD 7870 or GTX 670, which are both over twice as powerful in most any benchmark you compare them in. Running Doom was no small feat for this card, and I did not expect it to perform as well as it did. I mean, it's not going to be able to run the latest games at an even remotely playable frame rate, but it can still pull off a decent experience in games like CSGO. Then again, a lot of old cards can do that, so that sets the bar pretty low. In terms of the feature of this card, I think I might actually try a crossfire configuration. I haven't experimented with a dual GPU setup before, but I've always wanted to. I mean, I could have done it with two 4850s, but their lack of support for DirectX 11 makes me wonder why I still even have the things lying around. Oh, and we also have a community Discord server where we discuss a variety of topics, link in the description. With that, thank you for watching and I hope you enjoyed the video. I've left a few donation methods in the description, and if you want to support the channel directly, that's a great way to do so. If you have any questions or related comments, then leave them below and I'll be sure to respond to it. While you're at it, consider subscribing or leaving a like because it genuinely helps me out. That's about it. Have a great day. Bye.